All right, folks, we are going to be talking about a couple of concepts here called absolute and comparative advantage. The idea behind this is if we're going to trade as a society with another society or country, or even if we decide to trade amongst ourselves, well, who is going to make what? Now, you could look at it as, well, just who can make the most, but that's really not the most important thing. To illustrate this concept, let's say we have the United States and we have Guatemala, and we can produce corn and we can produce bananas. All right. Well, the US, if we really wanted to, could produce both more corn and more bananas because, hey, United States. All right. But does that mean that we should? Well, you might be thinking to ourselves, well, we can do the corn and the bananas, we do one or the other. Uh, we do the corn, right? Well, why do we do the corn? Well, it has to do with the fact that we don't give up very much to grow the corn. I don't know, I've got a whiteboard in front of me, haven't done anything with it yet. Maybe corn. Little corn on the cob here. It's going to probably not be way too many little things there. But we're going to grow the corn. The Guatemalans are going to grow the bananas. And it's because to grow corn, we give up very few bananas. For Guatemala to grow bananas, they give up very little corn. Whereas the inverse is true for each one of us for growing the other crop. If we want to grow bananas, all right, we first start growing them where the opportunity cost is low, like in South Florida, let's say, or tropical areas. But as we decide to go more in with the banana production, now we're going to be producing it in, Nebraska and Iowa, and we got to build greenhouses. All right, we're gonna use lots of resources to grow these bananas, and we're not going to get very many out of it. Whereas the opportunity cost in terms of corn is going to be very, very high. Okay, for Guatemala, it's the reverse. They don't give up very much corn to grow a whole lot of bananas. So what do? Well, we grow the corn, they grow the bananas, and then we trade with each other. All right. So when it comes to trade, what we care about is comparative advantage. Now, absolute advantage is, let me see if I can get this going right. Absolute advantage. My rough and ready definition for this is that this is who can make the most given the resources we have. So different countries have different resources. Because they have different resources, they have different opportunity costs. Right? Now, when it comes to absolute advantage, we're not even worried about the opportunity costs. We're just looking at who's able to make the most overall. So if we're looking at US and Guatemala, well, potentially the US has the absolute advantage in both items. We produce both more corn than Guatemala could. We do. And we could produce more bananas than Guatemala could. So we would have the absolute advantage in those items. Okay, but what we care about when it comes to trade is comparative advantage. And comparative advantage is who can make it with the least opportunity cost. So who has the lower opportunity cost? Meaning who gives up less of the other item to make it. All right. Now, when it comes to trade, it's this one that we're concerned about, the comparative advantage. Okay, when it comes to trade, we're not really concerned about absolute advantage. We can look at who has absolute advantage. Sure, there could be test questions that are asking about it, but it's going to be comparative advantage that we care about. That determines who's going to specialize in what products and therefore trade to the other side. Okay, now the way we're going to try to illustrate this is let's say we got a farmer and we got a rancher. So we got a farmer. Pardon the handwriting. It's not great under any circumstances, but especially when I'm trying to draw on a iPad here. So we have a farmer, we have a rancher, and let's say that they are producing meat and potatoes. All right, meat and potatoes. All right, I'm just abbreviating it there. So let's say the farmer is able to produce 1 ounce of meat every 60 minutes. Okay, or he can produce 1 ounce of potatoes every 15 minutes. All right. Now the rancher down here is able to do 1 ounce of meat every 20 minutes, or do 1 ounce of potatoes every 10 minutes. Okay, so this is the setup. This is what they're capable of producing. But we want to ask ourselves, well, what would it be if each one of these guys, the farmer and the rancher, decided to spend an entire 8-hour day doing nothing but producing meat or potatoes? All right, so let's say we do that. We got the farmer. Uh, Farmer, rancher, terribly written. So if the farmer were to spend 8 hours working on nothing but meat, well, he's able to do 1 ounce of meat per hour. So over 8 hours, that means he would produce 8 ounces. And then on the potatoes, he's able to do 4 ounces every hour. So over 8 hours, 4 times 8, 32. And then you got the rancher. He's able to do 3 ounces of meat per hour. So over 8 hours, 24. And then he's able to do 6 ounces of potatoes per hour. So over 8 hours, 48. All right. So this is the setup right here, right? The farmer is able to do 8 ounces of meat or 32 ounces of potatoes. Rancher can do 24 ounces of meat or 48 ounces of potatoes. Now, bear in mind here, this is an either or scenario, right? They can do one or they can do the other. Okay, so if if the farmer spends an entire 8 hours on producing meat, that means he cannot spend 30 or 8 hours doing potatoes. So to produce 8 hours, excuse me, to produce 8 ounces of meat, the opportunity cost is 32 ounces of potatoes, right? And the opportunity cost for producing 32 ounces of potatoes is giving up producing 8 ounces of meat. All right. Now, what we need to find then is, well, actually, let's ask ourselves a further question. Well, this is either or. It's going to be meat or potatoes, but you don't want that. You don't want meat or potatoes. What you really want is meat and potatoes. You want both at the same time. So let's say the farmer and the rancher decide to split their time a little bit. Hours on meat production. So what we had right here was what he was able to do over 8 hours. So over 4 hours, we're going to half that. All right. Before he was able to do 32. The rancher was in it and he was able to do 48 potatoes. Well, no, the rancher should never do that because, man, look at this down here. The farmer or rancher is able to produce so much more than what the farmer can. Well, yeah, that's true. But remember, we said that the U.S. could produce both more corn and bananas than Guatemala, but that doesn't mean that we should. If I had a gigantic whiteboard look on my room, you'd be able to see a list. It was 8 and 32 and 24 and 48. Back to the beginning. And we are going to use time as an input. All right, that's going to be the input that we will use. Time is always an input, and we're going to compare that. All right, so for the farmer was 60 and 15, the rancher was 20 and. All right, so input 60 minutes was required to make 1 ounce of meat. 15 minutes was required to produce 1 ounce of potatoes. So we're going to use 60 and 10 for the rancher. It was 20 and 10. 1 ounce of meat every 20 minutes, 1 ounce of potatoes every 10. So they're going to do 4 hours on each. So we got a setup. Let's say we got the farmer here. We got the rancher here. We got the meat. We got the potatoes. Meat, potatoes. And in this scenario, they are not going to trade. All right, they're not trading at all, not trading with each other. They're going to be producing on their own. Now, what this means is if you don't trade with somebody else, your production is your consumption and vice versa. You can't consume anything other than what it is that you produce, right? So you're limited by your own production as far as what you can consume. So in this without trade scenario, the production is the consumption. Okay. Now the farmer, we said, is going to spend. So he's able to do 4 meat potatoes over 6 hours. He's going to do 16. Do 24 meat. So oops. So now he's down to 12. So now he's going to do 24 potatoes. All right. So this is the situation the farmer and the rancher are in. This is what they produce. This is also what they're able to consume. Now, what we can do with this also, now you might be inclined to say, count over here was, so if we go back to this, now we're going to have a trade scenario with trade. We're going to have production, we're going to have trade, and we're going to have consumption. What's happening afterwards? All right. So the farmer is going to go all in on potato production. So he's going to produce 0 meat, and he will produce 32 ounces of potatoes. The rancher is going to split his time a little bit. He's going to spend 6 hours on meat production, 2 hours on potato production. So if he does that, he will produce 18 ounces of meat and 12 ounces of potatoes. All right. Now they trade. The farmer will get from the rancher 5 ounces of meat, and in return, he will give the rancher 15 ounces of potatoes. So he gets 5 meat, loses 15 potato. So that means the rancher over here will lose 5 meat and gain the 15 potato. Now, what do they have after the trade has taken place? This is what they're able to consume now. The farmer ends up with 5 meat and 17 potato. The rancher over here will end up with 13 meat and 27 potato. Right? We're just adding and subtracting here. So 0 plus 5 is 5, 32 minus 15 is 17, etc., etc. So this is what they're able to consume. Now we want to look at what do they have? What's the difference between what they have after the trade, what they're able to consume after the trade, versus what they're able to do when they had to produce all on their own? Well, the farmer has 1 additional ounce of meat, 5 versus 4. 1 additional, I was going to do red. 1 additional ounce of meat, 1 additional ounce of potato, right? 17 versus 16. The rancher has 1 additional ounce of meat, 13 versus 4. And 3 additional ounces of potatoes, 27 versus 24. So who won in this scenario? Well, they both did. You might be thinking the rancher because he got a couple of more potato, but no, they both won. Both of them have more than what they were capable of producing all on their own. So they both benefit. Here, the ratio is what it is. So the trade was 5 to 15. Well, why 5 to 15? If we take that down, it's 1 to 3, right? For every 1 meat, we were exchanging 3 potatoes. A 1 to 3 ratio. So we got the trade that is going on, and we understand why it's happening that all the way in. Look again, 15 minutes. Let's put this in a production possibilities curve. Farmer, rancher. So this is the farmer, meat, potatoes, rancher, meat, potatoes. All right. In the rancher's production possibilities curve, we'll just draw a straight line for convenience. It looks a little something like that, right? Where it was going to be 8 meat or 32 potatoes. All right. And then over here for the rancher, it's going to be 24 meat or 48 potatoes. And what they actually produced is represented by this. So what they actually produced was 4 meat and 16 potatoes. So we got a little dot right there. And over here, this is what the rancher actually produced. We got 12 meat and 24 potatoes. And that point right there on the line is what they produced. It's also what they consumed. All right, it is both at the same time. But let's say that the farmer gets together with a rancher and says, hey, you know what? I think we should specialize in making one of these and then we can trade with each other. Should the rancher go along with it? Okay? So we need to find out who's going to specialize in making what. We need to find who has the comparative advantage in each item, who has the least opportunity cost. Okay, so when it comes to making meat, who gives up the fewest potatoes? When it comes to making potatoes, who gives up the least amount of what we from the trade. In fact, if we were to go back over here to our graph, we would have a new line that would look a little something like this. So this is where they're able to consume now, right? Those points of consumption, those green dots, are outside their production possibilities curves. The lines, the PPC's production possibilities curves, are still indicative of the limitations on what they can produce. They still cannot produce beyond those lines. But because of the trade, they're now able to consume beyond those lines. They're able to consume more than they can produce. And so this is the benefit of trade. This is the benefit to nations. It's even the benefit to you as an individual, right? Think of all the stuff you have. Think of all of your clothes and computers and gadgets and phone and car, whatever it is you have. You're not at all capable of producing all that stuff, not by a long shot. Yet here you are able to consume it. And it's because as an individual within society, instead of trying to produce everything on your own, you instead specialize in doing one thing, you trade that for money, and then you trade the money for things that other people have specialized in doing. As a result, you wind up with consumption way outside of your ability to produce, way outside of your personal production possibilities curves. So this is the now there's here was let's see way. Oh, so let's go meat. And what we're going to do in order to find this is we're going to make a couple of T-charts. And this T-chart concept, I want you to do every time you see an absolute advantage or comparative advantage problem. If you do this at the outset, it makes life a whole lot easier. And the T-charts will give you all the information that you need to be able to answer any of the questions that come up. So farmer, rancher, meat, potatoes, meat, potatoes. So your T-charts will look a little something like this. And we're going to fill in the data that we have. So 8 and 32, 24, and 48. Here, I'll see if I can make those a little better there. 48. Okay. Now remember, this is opportunity cost. So the farmer to make meat gives up 32 potatoes. The rancher to do 24 meat gives up 48 potatoes, and vice versa. What we're asking ourselves is what is the opportunity cost for producing just one of these? All right? Produce just one meat. How many potatoes they give up? Now, some of you already jumped the correct answer, right? This is really just a ratio. So what we're going to do is say, well, it's an 8 to 32 ratio, right? We want the 1 over here on the left side. So the way we're going to do this is reduce. We're going to divide both sides by 8. It gives us a 1 over here. And then 32 divided by 8 is, of course, 4. All right? We'll do the same thing over here with the rancher. We got 24 to 48. We want the 1 on the left side, so we'll divide both sides by 24. We get a 1. 48 divided by 24 is 2. All right? So what we're saying here is that for every one meat, the farmer is giving up 4 potatoes. And for every one meat, the rancher is giving up 2 potatoes. And then we want to reverse this and find out what is going to be on the other side. To produce 1 potato, 1 ounce potatoes, how much meat do they give up? All right, so we are going to try to erase. This isn't erasing. This is supposed to erase. Erase, erase. There we go. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to divide on the other side this time to get the one on the right side. So we got 8 to 32. We'll divide both sides by 32. And when we do that, we get a 1 here. And then on the other side, we're going to reduce the fraction as much as possible. So it gives us 1/4. Okay, stick with fractions, don't do the decimals. Trust me, they're easier to mess around with, especially when you see how we can inverse things. All right, over here for the rancher, we got 24 to 48. We'll divide both sides by 48. Get a 1 over here. 24 divided by 48 is 1/2. Okay, so for every 1 potato, the farmer gives up producing a 1/4 ounce of meat, and the rancher, to produce 1 ounce of potato, gives up producing 1/2 ounce of meat. All right, now we have the T-charts done, and actually these silly things give us all the information we need to be able to answer problems and respond to questions. So there we go. If you look at this, we can look at the top line here to determine absolute advantage, right? So who has the absolute advantage when it comes to making meat? That's going to be the rancher does. He's able to do 24 ounces of meat, while the farmer can only do 8 ounces of meat. So absolute advantage in meat. Who has the absolute advantage in potatoes? That's the rancher again. He's able to do 48 ounces of potatoes, whereas the farmer can only do 32. Remember, with absolute advantage, we're looking at who can simply do the most. But when we're coming to trade, what matters is comparative advantage. Who gives up the least? Well, in meat production, the farmer, to produce 1 ounce of meat, gives up 4 ounces of potatoes. The rancher, to produce 1 ounce of meat, is giving up 2 ounces of potatoes. The rancher is giving up less, giving up fewer potatoes to be able to make that 1 ounce of meat. Therefore, he has the comparative advantage in meat production. In potatoes, the farmer, to make that 1 ounce of potatoes, is giving up a 1/4 ounce of meat. The rancher, to make the 1 ounce potatoes, gives up 1/2 ounce of meat. In this case, the farmer is giving up a less meat to make the 1 ounce potatoes, so he has the comparative advantage in potato production. So when they specialize and trade, the rancher will specialize in producing meat, the farmer will specialize in producing potatoes. All right, with me so far? Big advantage of trade. All right, now I want to go back to this guy right here and pay attention to why it is that a good reason for that is that 1 to 3 fell in between 1 to 4 here and 1 to 2 over here. So for every 1 meat that is traded, it had to trade between 2 potatoes and 4 potatoes. This is another one of the advantages of the T-chart is it gives what we call the terms of trade right there. Shows you what acceptable trade is going to be. Now, why 3? Why does it have to be between 2 and 4? The 2 and the 4? Well, let's think about this. For the farmer, the trade is going to be beneficial only if it's going to be 1 ounce of meat below 4 potatoes. All right. If it's anything above 4 potatoes, that means that he is going to lose on the deal. So let's say, as an example, the trade terms are going to be 1 for 10. So the rancher is going to give the farmer 1 ounce of meat in return for 10 potatoes. Well, should the farmer do it? No. Let's think about this. Normally, if the farmer makes 1 ounce of meat, he loses 4 potatoes, right? If the terms of trade are 1 to 10, the farmer is going to get an ounce of meat, but he'll lose 10 potatoes. Well, why in the world would he do that? He's not going to. So if the trade is anything above 4, he's not going to do it. And over here on the rancher side, if the rancher is going to be looking at trade, anything below 2 is going to be bad for him. All right. Normally, if he makes 2 potatoes, he loses 1 meat. All right. Let's say the terms of the trade are 1 for 1, 1 ounce of meat for 1 potatoes. Well, now the farmer is going to lose this ounce of meat, and in return, he'll get just 1 potato. That doesn't make any sense from his perspective. He might as well make his own potatoes. He'll lose that ounce of meat and have 2 potatoes, 2 ounces of potatoes. So anything below 2, the rancher won't do it, and anything below or above 4, the farmer won't do it. So it needs to be somewhere that 1 ounce of meat will trade between 2 and 4 ounces of potatoes for both of them to benefit. So this is why the trade back, all right. Now, it could be 2.1, it could be 3.9, it doesn't matter. As long as it's somewhere between 2 and 4, that's going to be acceptable and beneficial to both sides. All right. And then when it comes to trading 1 ounce of potato, well, then it will have to trade between 1/4 and 1/2 ounce of meat. Again, as long as it's somewhere in there, beneficial to both. Less than 1/4, the farmer won't do it. More than a half, the rancher won't do it. So this is another one of the nice things about the T-chart is it shows us what the acceptable terms of trade are going to be in a nice, easy to understand format. All right. I can't remember if I pointed this out earlier. I'm actually doing part of this like 3 days after I started it. One of the things you'll notice is that when we're doing the math on these guys, right, just take the inverse, right? 1/1 here becomes 1/1 there. 4/1 becomes 1/4. Right? I may have covered it. I just want to make sure to point that out again. Right, we have the terms of the trade, right? It shows us has to be between the 2 and the 4, the 1/4 and the 1/2. And we do our T-charts at the beginning in order to be able to illustrate all this, all right? Now, what we did here, we call this the output method, all right? So this is output method, all right? We also have what is going to be the input method. Again, I know my handwriting is a thing of marvel. All right, now with the input method here, well, let's go back to the output method. With the output method, what we did is what we were comparing is things that came out of the production process. So we were comparing the meat that was produced and the potatoes that were produced. All right. With the input method, we use something that goes into the production process. That's gonna be our comparison, what goes in instead of what comes out. All right. Now, what we're going to do here is so let's go back to our charts here. We're going to make a new T-chart. So, go back to there, meat and potato, meat and potato, all right? But this time we're going to compare inputs for the farmer, 60 and 15. So, 20 and 10, all right? Now we're going to do something similar to what we did before, where we have the ratio, so we've got 60 to 15. Now with the input method, we want the 1 over here, we want the 1 over here on the left side, but instead of dividing into the denominator like we normally would, instead we're going to put the number we're simplifying, the side we're simplifying, into the numerator. All right? So we get 60 over 60, it gives us 1 on the left side, and then on the right side, 60 over 15 equals 4. All right? And then we can take the inverse again, so we got 1 here, and then 1/4 over there. Well, what just happened? Hey, check this out. Look at that. 1 to 4, 1 to 4. 1/4 to 1, same thing right there. All right, what we did here is we took these inputs and we just basically converted them into the same thing as what the outputs were up there with the output method. All right. And we do the same thing over here with the rancher. So we have 20 to 10. So we want the 1 over here. What are we going to do? Put the side we're simplifying down to 1. We're going to put it in the numerator. So we get a 1. 20 over 10 becomes 2, like so. We take the inverse when we flip. So it's going to look like that. And we have the same results again. Okay? So what that means is that when we are using the t-charts, even though we have the input method, or I'm talking about inputs, we do our t-charts correctly, we can still use this information here on these last 2 lines the same way as we did up here using the output method. All right. The only real difference here is that if the question is asking about absolute advantage when we're looking at the top line, what we're paying attention to then is going to be the smaller number. Normally up here using the output method, we use the bigger number because the absolute advantage is who can produce the most. All right. Down here, we're looking at the smaller number for the same reason. The people who can produce the most, or the country that can produce the most, or person or rancher or whatever, is going to be the one who can do it with the least amount of input. All right. So if the rancher can produce 1 ounce of potatoes every 10 minutes, and the farmer can do 1 ounce of potatoes every 15 minutes, well, it requires him less time to make that 1 ounce of potatoes, which means he can produce more potatoes overall what the farmer is capable of. So he'd have the absolute advantage potatoes, right? Same thing over here with meat. Takes him less time to make 1 ounce of meat versus the farmer, so that means he would have absolute advantage in meat. All right. So this is what we're going to do, all right, with our t-charts. And whenever you encounter an absolute or comparative advantage problem, first thing I want you to do is make your t-chart, all right? Do it at the outset. It's going to give you all the answers you need. And let's walk through an example so we can see this, right? Since we've kind of cluttered things up with all of this. Let's say we have a scenario where, oh, I don't know. Let's say we go back to talking about the U.S. and Guatemala with corn and bananas. So let's say the U.S. corn and bananas. Let's say the U.S. is capable of doing in a year, or no, let's say day. The U.S. can do 1,000 bushels of corn, or it can do, oh, let's say 250 bushels of bananas. Nah, fingers of bananas, bunches of bananas. I don't know, we'll just keep it bushels. So 1,000 bushels of corn or 250 bushels of bananas. And then over here, Guatemala, Guat, corn, bananas. All right. Let's say in this situation, Guatemala can do, oh goodness, let's say 750 bushels of corn or 250 bushels of bananas. All right. So what I would like you to do at this point is actually pause the video. I would like you to do your own T-chart where you, just making that a little bit neater there, make your own T-charts and finish this out, all right? So finish out the T-charts at the corn of the bananas, right, with the 1,250 and then the 750, 250. Do it on your own, right? And I want to find out who has the absolute advantage and who has the comparative advantage in each, what the terms of trade are, etc. Right? All this can be shown by our T-chart. So pause now and come back. All right, I'm assuming you're back. I didn't pause at all. Okay, we do our T-charts. So we got 1,250 over there. So we have our ratio, 1,250. Now me, I always like to have the one on the left side first, just makes life easier. So this is output, right? The first thing you should ask yourself, is this output or is it input? It's output. We're talking about something coming out of the process. What is being produced? So that means we'll use the denominator. We'll divide both sides by 1,000. So we get 1 over here, and then we get 1/4 over here, right? So that gives us 1 to 4, right? Which means, excuse me, let me erase. 1/4. And we know we take the inverse, that gives us a 1 there, a 4 right there. Right over here, we have 750 to 250. So we want a 1 on the left side. We'll divide both sides by 750. So we get a 1 here. This gives us 1/3. So there's our setup. There's our completed T-charts. Okay. Now, who has the absolute advantage when it comes to, I'm going to use blue arrow. Who's got the absolute advantage when it comes to corn? All right, well, who can produce the most? Here we see that the U.S. is able to do 1,000 bushels. Guatemala can do 750. So what that means is the U.S. has the absolute advantage when it comes to corn. Right? We're able to produce more than Guatemala can. Who has the absolute advantage of bananas? Trick question. Nobody does. Right? Both sides are able to do 250 bushels of bananas. So nobody has the absolute advantage of bananas. Okay, who has the comparative advantage when it comes to corn? Well, the U.S., to produce 1 bushel of corn, loses a 1/4 ounce of bananas. Guatemala loses a 1/4 ounce of bananas. Guatemala is losing more, and the U.S. is losing less. Since the U.S. has the lower opportunity cost, that means it has the comparative advantage in corn production. Right? And then when it comes to bananas, right? To produce 1 bushel of bananas, the U.S. loses 4 bushels of corn. To produce 1 bushel of bananas, Guatemala loses 3 bushels of corn. So that means that Guatemala has the comparative in bananas. All right. Now, you may have noticed you can only have the comparative in one thing. You can have the absolute advantage in both items, like the rancher in the previous scenario, but you can have the comparative advantage in only one item, not both. All right, so once we know that the U.S. had the comparative advantage in corn, we knew Guatemala automatically had the comparative advantage in bananas. All right, let's look at something else here. If I were to ask you what would be an acceptable terms of trade for 1 bushel of bananas, all right, well, you could say 3.5 bushels of corn. Why that? I asked 1 bushel of bananas, right? What would I have to trade for? It has to trade somewhere between 3 and 4 bushels of corn. Anywhere within that range, good for both. So 3.5 bushels of corn for 1 bushel of bananas would be acceptable. All right. And what would be the case for 1 bushel of corn? Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 bushels of bananas. All right. So again, this stuff lays everything out for us. We can see what the opportunity cost is for each side. We can see who has the comparative advantage, who has the absolute advantage. We're able to see what the acceptable terms of trade are going to wind up being. All right. So if you do your stuff at the beginning, then it gives us all the information we need in order to be able to answer any questions that come our way. All right. All right. That's it.